One is from Lois. She asks, why are the Republican senators and representatives so terrified of Trump?
Yeah. Lois, you break my heart. I wish I could tell you. We could focus on the positive and talk a lot about Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
I think we could talk something about the weakness of the party system. I think maybe there are many things to say, but one thing that I've been struck is when you have a political system that rewards people who are very good at raising money. The people who are very good at raising money tend not to be heroes, and in fact tend to be not very independent people at all. And so we have built maybe a Darwinian ecology that rewards people without a lot of courage, and then we need people with courage. And guess what? We built an ecology that doomed the courageous ones to extinction and rewarded the uncourageous ones.
Yeah, that's a profound statement. I've got another question. One is from Thomas. He asks, given the political paralysis of the West from COVID-19, combined with no leadership from the US, what do you think will happen to democracy in Hong Kong this year?
Yeah, Thomas, you're singing my song here. I mean, it's just so amazing. We've had this truly global crisis affecting all the developed countries together, and where's the Skype call with the heads of all of the leaders in one frame? I mean, you've all seen that joke about the Last Supper on Zoom, right? But we haven't had that. Well, you could have the G20 on Zoom, and we haven't had that. That neither the reality of it nor the symbolism of leaders working together. Everyone has been on their own, and the result has been we've had. I mean, look, some of this, I don't think it's a terrible thing that we have many different countries starting vaccine research projects at the same time. When you don't know what to do, it's good to do lots of different things. But the idea that we put up all these barriers to travel, I mean, that struck me as just completely irrational. Donald Trump is always congratulating himself for having built travel barriers that keep foreigners out of the United States, but that allow Americans returning from foreign countries, of course, to return because they must, not understanding, well, the virus can travel just as well on an American returning home as it can on a Chinese person visiting the United States. And of course, Hong Kong has been left to its own devices. Because of the strength and power of China, there's a limit to how much we can do for Hong Kong, but I think we can also we should be working now. Hong Kong is a warning to all of us that we need to build a world in which China sits down at a table and discovers that there are enough like-minded countries with enough economic clout that their future depends on adapting to others, not their future depending on using their wealth to force others to adapt to them.
Mm-hmm. Reasonable suggestion. Now, I've got another question from Pravind. He wants to know where the Republican Party goes to following Trump, especially since demographic change within the United States may favor the Democratic Party.
Let's start with the demographic change.
Okay.
So there was a joke after the end of communism in Eastern Europe. How many Poles / Czechs / Slovaks does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is none. The market will do it. And that people think of these, people are very willing to put their future into the hands of these forces of history. What ought to be is demographic change neither favors one party nor another. That the history of past immigration into the United States showed that immigrant groups flowed into both Republican and Democratic parties, and often not because of anything the parties did, but because of the inherent tensions between the immigrant groups themselves. So the Irish immigration in the United States, which the Irish Catholic, Southern Irish immigration, which really gets going in the 1840s and is strong through the 1880s and 1890s and continues in the 20th century. Irish immigrants tended to move into the Democratic Party and make the Democratic Party, at least in the North, a very Irish institution. Shortly after the Irish began arriving in large numbers, or a generation after the Irish began arriving in large numbers, we began receiving very large numbers of immigrants from Italy, who often arrived in the same areas that the Irish did, and discovered that the Irish controlled the Catholic Church and the Democratic Party. And so Italian Americans have tended to be Republican. And not because their politics were necessarily so very different from their Irish neighbors. It was because they needed a political machinery of their own. The Irish had taken one, they moved into the other. And I don't think there's any reason that the politics of the 21st century should look differently from the politics of the 19th if it's allowed. So demographic change, which means rising numbers of, to the extent that demographic change means rising numbers of people from other countries, especially the global south, that doesn't have to be an advantage for the Democrats. But demographic change means a couple of other things that are maybe more inherently challenging for a party of the center right. The first is the extraordinary rise in American secularism, the move away from organized religion. You sometimes hear it said that the fastest growing religion in the United States is Islam. That's true only because people don't count no religion as religion. But if you count no religion, then that is far and away the most rapidly growing. And it's growing because of the move of young people away from the churches of their parents. And the other, of course, is the increasing numbers of single people, and single people don't tend to fit well into parties of the center right. But there are opportunities here that for parties of the center right, but they just have to stop insulting and repudiating people. And one of the things that is so strange about Donald Trump is that he's trying to build a party of enterprise and markets on the votes of people who live in the areas where enterprise and markets are working least well, and repudiating the people who live in the areas where enterprise and markets are working best. And that's not sustainable.
Well, we've all over the world, there's been this flip from voters for more conservative parties being, they used to be the wealthier business owners, that group of people, and now it's increasingly the working class, while those who vote for left-wing parties are increasingly urbanites, educated, more wealthier professionals. So this flip has occurred all over the world, not just in the United States. Do you think there's a future for the Republican Party in combining social conservatism, which seems to appeal to many working class voters, with more economic centrism, or moving to the left on economics?
Yeah. Well, so, the future of social conservatism depends on what content you're going to give to social conservatism. So I think that social conservatism has a very lively future if it is expressed as a defensive work. For example, what that would mean in real world terms is that a conservative party would say, we are against the universal basic income. We are for forms of income support that relate what you get back from the state in some way to what you pay in. So we're in favor of maybe wage subsidies. We're in favor of help with health care. But no, we are opposed to just getting paid regardless of what you do. And then you leave the concept of a universal basic income, which is not a terrible, but that's an idea for a party of the center left, for a non-social conservative party. In the same way that a party of the center right can be socially conservative in saying we want to see families formed. The things I was saying a few minutes ago about how we think people will be happier if they form partnerships and raise children. And we want to make that easier for them. And then leave it to somebody else to say, no, the meaning of life is expressing your own individual personality. And if you choose to form a partner, that's great. But if you don't, that's also great. But if social conservatism means truly reactionary cultural politics, then obviously it doesn't have a future. It's one thing for a conservative party to say, your parents make a good point. It's a very different thing to say, your dead great grandparents,
Yeah.
they made a good.